All right, hello everyone, and thank you all for joining us during the Lytham Partners Summer 2022 Investor Conference. My name is Robert Blum, Managing Partner at Lytham Partners, and during this discussion here, we welcome Arianne Phosphate, ticker symbol of DAN on the TSXV and DRRSF, and Frank on the OTC, and the company's president, Mr. Brian Ostroff. Before we begin, I do want to remind everyone that Brian is available for one-on-one meetings today and later this week. If you've not already signed up for a one-on-one, you can send me an email to Blum, B-L-U-M, at lythampartners.com, or visit the website, lythampartners.com/virtual. You can click on the one-on-one meeting request button and we will look to get you taken care of. So, with that, let's begin. Brian, let's just start off at the top. Some sort of very exciting news today out of the company. Care to walk us through the news?
Yeah. Well, first, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. The timing really couldn't be any better. As you had said this morning, we put out some very, very exciting news. Arianne has received back some positive tests, positive confirmation that our phosphate concentrate can be used in batteries, the LFP. So, back in November, we had announced that we were working with some battery guys that, due to the nature of our phosphate, it looked like it could work in these batteries. Those conversations had progressed to a point where we were provided a spec sheet and asked to go basically make this high purity phosphoric acid using our phosphate at an independent facility. So we just recently received back those specs. We met them with flying colors, and this is really significant. I mean, we'll get a little bit more into the overall phosphate macro, I assume, during our conversation. But for your attendees here at the conference, the LFP battery, lithium iron phosphate battery, is a battery that has really been, gaining acceptance. A lot of the major car companies now are looking to use these LFPs. Tesla had announced all of their standard range vehicles. Volkswagen, GM, and Ford are looking to do that. Some of the uncertainty out of Russia and nickel supply has caused Rivian to look to switch over to these LFPs. And so with the ascent of the LFP battery, just like lithium or some of these other battery materials, it's forced these car companies, these battery makers to try and source a supply. And Arianne is a company that they've been talking with. And I think today's news really becomes very, very exciting in terms of our path forward in that industry.
So, as you said, it sounds very exciting. What does, or maybe more importantly, what will this mean for the company?
Yeah. So, as I'm sure your viewers know, most phosphate winds up in fertilizer. That's what most people think if they think phosphate. About 85% of that is in fertilizer. Now, the other 15% goes into other applications. I call them specialty applications, and they'll range for things like food preservatives or consumer products like detergents and cosmetics. It's used in animal feeds. But aside from these consumer applications, phosphate is used in industrial applications, and in the fabrication of semiconductors, and as I've just alluded to, the LFP battery. And it's kind of interesting because I think what that has done is it's kind of maybe driven some attention to sleepy, phosphate. Now, what all of this means for us is our phosphate is a little different, and we'll maybe get into that in a little bit. But what this news means is, in terms of our potential customers, we're not just limited to fertilizer, whereas other phosphate producers, may not be in a position to access some of these other markets. So look, more potential customers means more customers, and that's obviously going to be a big driver for the development of our company.
All right. So yeah, I think you were just sort of alluding to it there a moment ago, but you talk about Arianne's Phosphate Concentrate and how it allows you to address other applications such as what we're talking about here. Talk about what the differences are there. Explain the differences.
Sure. So I'll try not to bore your listeners too much, but most of the world's phosphate, comes from sedimentary deposits. Now, you know what, maybe I'm even going to go one step back. So, when people think of commodities, let's say gold or copper, your end product's all the same, whether you've mined it in Quebec or Nevada or Argentina, your end product is going to be the same. Now, with phosphate, that is not the case. You will get some discrepancies. The biggest really, as I'd start to say, most of the world's phosphate comes from sedimentary deposits, well over 90%. And the challenge with these deposits are they have a lot of deleterious elements in them. And so that means things like radioactive elements, uranium, thorium, means heavy metals like cadmium. So, first and foremost, of course, if you're talking food, that's not a wonderful thing, and you look to manage that. But as you start moving into some of these specialty applications, and particularly things like industrial applications and LFPs, you're going to need a pure phosphate concentrate, or at the very least, a phosphate concentrate that can make a very pure acid. And so there are these rare deposits, igneous deposits. That's what Arianne has. There's maybe only a dozen in the world. They're formed differently. And certainly in the case of Arianne, our deposit, our concentrate, doesn't have any issue with these deleterious elements. No issues with the heavy metals, no issues with radioactive elements. And so what that means is, as I was saying earlier, yes, of course, we can target the fertilizer, the traditional fertilizer markets, but we can get into some of these other specialty applications as well. And, we've talked a bit about the LFPs, but, if people take a look at Arianne and some of the other things that we've been up to, what we've announced, because of the nature of our phosphate, it can be used, and we're working with some companies now and some research institutions about alternative fertilizers, direct applications. So it means that our phosphate doesn't have to go through an acidulation process to get turned into a phosphoric acid, which then gets turned into traditional phosphate fertilizers like MAP and DAP. If you can find the right bacterias, etc., our phosphate can be blended into composts, waste, organic waste, and be put directly on the farmer's field. I mean, this is wildly exciting. It's organic, it's circular economy, because you are going to be reusing this organic waste. And also, you are not going to need some other things like ammonia. when you're talking MAP and DAP, the A is ammonia. You get ammonia from natural gas. Natural gas prices are going up, and certainly the Russian situation has curtailed that. And so Arianne is in a position to take advantage of all of these markets.
Right. So maybe aside from the differences around the nature of the deposit, yeah, maybe talk a little bit about your project and what the path forward is here.
Yeah. So to your point, Arianne really is a special project, that our Lac St project. We've talked a bit about the nature of the phosphate that it will produce, and that's huge. But also, look, we're in Quebec, Canada, which is a tremendous mining jurisdiction, very mining friendly, geopolitically safe. And sadly, that actually separates the project as well. So most phosphate concentrate actually comes out of the Middle East and North Africa. And historically, this is not an area that has always been easy to navigate. Disruptions have occurred, things like Arab Spring, hostilities in the region. And so, we need to recognize that is a challenge if the world is going to get the phosphate that it needs. And so by being here in Canada, right off the bat, that is a big deal. It's also one of the few projects that has moved forward. We are fully permitted. We did go through a pretty lengthy bear market in phosphate and fertilizers, and a lot of projects just didn't move forward. We were fortunate. We are fully permitted. We're fortunate as well. Infrastructure, it's all there. We've contracted life of mine supply of power from a hydroelectric dam. That's ESG. It's clean, it's green, it's renewable, it's reasonably priced. And so again, very fortunate. We also have government support, community support, and the economics are just outstanding. We're projected to be amongst the world's lowest cash cost providers of, well, I shouldn't say providers, cash cost producers of phosphate per nutrient value. And we've drilled off close to 50 years at this point. So yeah, this thing is very special and a lot different than a lot of these other phosphate projects out there.
Over the last year or so in particular, you've been pretty optimistic about phosphate and prices, and the macro certainly seems to have come around. Maybe could you update us on the macro and your guess as to where we go from here now?
Yeah, you're right. I have been pretty optimistic for some time now. Things have really changed over the last year and a half. The ag cycles, fertilizer, ag inputs, they tend to run pretty long cycles. And so the last top in ferts was 2012. We bottomed towards the end of 2019. That was a 7-year downtrend. And what happens when you go into a 7-year downtrend is no one really worries about supply. No one is out increasing the size of their mines. As I had already said, really Arianne was the only large scale development project to move forward during that period of time. And there really wasn't any exploration. But the kicker here is, phosphate is one of those commodities where demand grows every single year. So price might have been dropping for 7 years, and no one was doing anything about supply for 7 years. But during those 7 years, demand kept growing and growing and growing. And quite honestly, now I expect, for reasons like the LFP, demand had averaged 1.5% to 2% a year. I think you're going to see demand for phosphate grow at an even faster rate than that. And so 7 years, nothing in supply growth, demand growing, and you've started your turn. Now, we have had a couple of big global events that have accelerated maybe the price rise, but I'd argue that they'd have got there anyways. And really, I guess the two biggest events, first would be, so as I had said, the Middle East is the big player when you talk about phosphate concentrate, the material that gets made into things like battery acids or fertilizers, the end phosphate product. Well, China is a major player in the production of phosphate fertilizers, the MAP, the DAP, etc. And in fact, they represent roughly 30% of the traded market. Well, at the end of October, so 6-7 months ago, they actually announced that they were halting the exports of their phosphate fertilizers. That's 30% of the market. We have seen what's happened to oil prices and nickel prices when Russia was out of the market, and they were nowhere near 30%. So, you've got that. And then Russia. So Russia is also a pretty big producer of fertilizers. They're 10% of phosphate fertilizers. They're roughly 25% of the ammonia or nitrogen-based fertilizers. So, all of a sudden, not only have you not been growing global supply, but now some of that supply is locked in. Demand continues to grow. We need fertilizer. And, we've really got a big issue. Just to pile on a little bit more, Ukraine. So, Ukraine's referred to as the breadbasket of Europe. But in reality, it's also the breadbasket of the Middle East and parts of Africa. And so that wheat wasn't planted this year. I mean, you're having a problem even getting the wheat that was stockpiled and had already been grown, how you get that out of the country. That aside, again, this stuff isn't growing for this year, which means come the fall, there's nothing there to be harvested. So I talked about Arab Spring. If you take a look at when Arab Spring happened, it was pretty much the fall of 2010 through the summer of 2011. Well, why did Arab Spring happen? Arab Spring happened not because people wanted a change of government. Arab Spring happened because people wanted food. They wanted food that they could afford. And, today, you see the prices of grains going up. They look just like they did starting the summer of 2010. A country like Egypt, which is a big producer of phosphate, they get 80% of their wheat from the Ukraine and Western Russia. And that's just not going to show up. So sadly, I think that there's an Arab Spring 2.0 in the makings. And you have food inflation, you have money supply that has gone up. So, my crystal ball, I think everyone's looking down at fertilizer prices and everyone's asking, how far is it going to drop? I'm in the back of my mind kind of thinking, how much higher is it going to go? And I think that's, a real possibility.
Let's try to transition from that for just a moment. Talk about Arianne, the investment versus Arianne, the company.
Yeah. Good question. You're right. Let's just take a breath. So Arianne, today we have $100 million market cap for what is, and that's Canadian, by the way, so 80 million US. And that is for what is today the world's largest greenfield deposit. We make the purest concentrate, and we've talked about security of supply. We're fully permitted, we're first up of the big projects, and we have $100 million market cap. Back in 2012, which was the last time people cared about fertilizers, we had $160 million market cap. So we need our market cap to go up to 60% to go back to where it was. And by the way, back then, we had really just started drilling. No feasibility, no permits, no collaboration agreement, no signed offtakes, no anything. And that's really a product, I think, of nobody really cared. Look, a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it. It doesn't make a sound. Look, everyone turns bearish on phosphate and forgets that we're going to need to eat. All of our advancements pretty much go under the radar. But again, we do need to eat. No one really worries about it until it's a problem. Everyone now recognizes it's a problem. And so people are caring. So, at $100 million market cap, I think that's laughable, but maybe it's a little bit better than $30 or $40 million market cap that we wound up going down to. And just to put that in context, if we were in production today, right here, right now, we would gross profit to the tune of about 500 million a year. There's not a lot of ways for investors to be involved in the space. There are obviously the very large cap guys like the Mosaics and Nutrients. Those guys are fully vertically integrated. They're not just phosphate. If someone is looking for a way to be involved in this macro, and look, ag, and I think people are waking up to this, but ag is a good investment. Ag's a good investment because, first of all, it's not highly correlated to overall markets, which is a money manager you've got to love. And as well, look, inflation has become, the buzzword. Inflation. Everyone's trying to figure out how to protect against inflation. Well, crypto, there's definitely the precious metals, maybe some hard assets like real estate, although with interest rates moving up, that might be a bit of an issue. Look, what's inflating? Your cost of living. What's your cost of living? Well, it's food. You do that 3 times a day. And so, if you want to concern yourself about protecting against inflation, I think ag's a really good place. And I think that Arianne is a really inexpensive way to be part of that. And so, I think that Arianne should be on most investors' radar screen. I think the future looks really pretty good.
I think we've covered a lot here. We only have maybe a minute or so remaining, from the news this morning to the macro to sort of company specific stuff. Anything else that maybe we haven't touched on that would be a good takeaway for the audience here today?
Yeah, Arianne, maybe, I'd say a year ago really wasn't known by investors. I'd say even today, by and large, not really known by investors, but definitely made some headway. But in the corporate world, the world of fertilizer, even in terms of starting now in the batteries or alternative fertilizers, Arianne is well known. It really is a best of class project. And so, we've got a lot of interesting conversations going on. You know, we continue to believe that as some of these conversations come to fruition, you're looking at a pretty significant re-rating in the company. And so I'm pretty excited as I look out over the next couple of quarters. I think we're going to do quite well for the company and ultimately for our investors.
Perfect. Sounds good. Well, we'll leave it there. Brian, thank you very much for the time today. Greatly appreciated. Again, I want to remind everyone, if you've not already signed up for a one-on-one meeting here today or tomorrow, or even after the event is complete, you can send me an email to bloom@lythampartners.com, or again, visit our website at lythampartners.com/virtual. There's instructions on there on how to request a meeting, and I'll go ahead and get you all taken care of. So we hope you enjoy the conference. Brian, thank you very much for the time today. Greatly appreciate it.
Robert, thank you.
Appreciate it.